southern Italy. I just explained to you where Lecce is. It's in the heel of the south. I started studying there myself. Actually, we more or less were contemporaries, students. And then we made a career in archaeology and ancient history. You're an associate professor in ancient history and geography. And well, she's internationally renowned for her work on Greek colonization, and that is indeed what your lecture will be about today. She's already given a formal lecture on Friday. I thought it would be interesting also to link it up to this small meeting, relatively small group of students. Again, just to make you understand, there are about 6 Dutch students and 6 Italian students will be excavating at Mediterranean this year. So we just had a brief introduction into the excavations, and we are eager to hear what you have to say, what to tell us about the Greek colonization. Mediterranean is our object this year, not La Mastruola, but I think it is highly relevant. It's about Greek and local populations in southern Italy. That's Mediterranean as well. So there will be time for discussion as well. I'll close the door. The floor is yours.
It's fine. Thank you. Thank you to be here. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to Professor Burgers for his presentation. He knows that this argument concerning colonization and interactions, various ways in which Greeks, the various Greek groups in southern Italy, and the various native or local but communities interacted is a central topic in the studies we conducted in Lecce and in southern Italy. And sometimes we agreed, sometimes we have discussion, because as I think we can see this evening, perspectives in historical studies and in archaeological studies are sometimes different. We look the same thing with a different approach, and so is important, and is one, perhaps the first of the points I want to discuss with you this evening. Understand each other, and understand the subject, the scope of the study, which historians do and archaeologists do. So, I'll be a little bit covering the same arguments I discussed last Friday, but it's important, and I start from my first image, which shows you the same idea. 2 warriors fighting, and in my image you see in the higher part of the screen is an image on a local Campanian tomb. The idea, however, is from Greek iconography, and you see here the relief on clay decorative image, which comes from native area, in fact, in the internal Basilicata, southern Italy, but is of perhaps Tarantino, Greek anyway, handcraft. So, if we have to understand this entangling, this mixing of cultures and ideas that creates Magna Graecia as an historical experience. We have to understand each other on some particular categories. So I come back again on categories and on one idea I think is fundamental to frame the Greek movement, the Greek settlement and their interaction with others in the Mediterranean. That is Mediterranean mobility. Then I hope to show you the shift from an approach which only shows Greek colonies within a mentality which was concentrated on the central role of Greeks, to frontier history. That's an approach, sociological approach, that looks at the construction of a system of interaction. This is only one of the different models applied to the history of Magna Graecia, southern Italy. In my opinion, is the best one, or the one that gives more opportunity to understand what, in fact, the relationship were. And the last point, I hope I'll arrive there, is to look inside some, picking on the various situations, some context with their own proper sources, which can make us understand the different level and the different kind of relationship we can find. Sometimes only by archaeological sources, sometimes, and that is a particular stand, I mean, but some archaeologists do not agree with this. I mean, using together written sources and documentary sources, archaeology, but also written sources which come directly from the past, that's epigraphical sources. The first point, mobility. I show you a classical map from an historical atlas that shows the yellow Greek presence as a continuous presence on all the coasts of Mediterranean, but importantly you can see that also others, in this case the green Etruscans and the gray the Phoenicians are considered. In fact, if we want to draw an exact idea, an exact picture of mobility in the Mediterranean, we as first have to forget the imagined Mediterranean and think that the real picture in which we have to frame this move of things, men, ideas, is a net of connection, a net that is in particular drawn by routes on the sea, but also inside, in the land, in the Italian peninsula. You have to imagine that people move, that local people were not standing from the most ancient times in the same place, but they went on with colonization, internal colonization. So when we see the word colonization in the period that goes from the 8th, in effect, to the 5th century before Christ, we have to think about a general general opportunities that are not reserved only to the Greeks and to their special way of settle abroad. That way of settle abroad has for us a higher level of problematization. The name colony and the problem that the idea of colony brings together is something that we have to understand. So let me ask you, what's the first idea that comes to you in mind when you read colonization and colony? Let me ask him and answer, please.
European colonization, so moving to the Americas, for example, from the European continent.
And in terms of relation, what kind of idea?
Imperialism.
Yes, of course. This is our.
Yeah, people coming to a place from abroad and then, kind of feeling superior or like taking over or, well, wanting to put their own culture and also their power in that particular place. I think maybe in a general sense.
That's exactly what, for all of us, colonization means. It's our fountain, our culture fountain, because all of us as a cultural group has been a colonizer, and the idea of superiority, of peer relationship at least, is rooted in our in the sound of the word colonization. But in fact, this is a sort of transformation that was applied to the original way of move of the Greeks, that is connected to the word apoikia that you see, as colonization gives us more problems than solution. Because apoikia as first is a word that means go out of your home, go abroad. Nothing more, not as the sense of the Latin colonia, that something more, that something that you choose because you want to work the land and create a productive community, which in some sense depends from a major center or authority. This is not in fact the sense of Greek settlement abroad at first. So the translation, Greek colonization, equal to productive settlement proposing to acquisition of primary goods, it is quite right for a large amount of settlements, but not for all. We have a lot of ways to stay as apoikoi, as people who is abroad by the Greeks at first, and sometimes we see these kind of settlements to change in time into something more organized and more hierarchical as a relation with the means of production of riches. The other level of misunderstanding was the association with the categories of dependence, of possession, of nation, of territory, that are all and in all senses modern and do not, they are not pertaining in any way to the larger majority of Greek settlements. And the final result was the creation of a parallelism between the ancient phenomenon and modern experiences. So in this series you see the change we made on the ancient idea, the way in which we all listen to our phantoms, projecting ourselves into the past, perhaps to feel as in peace with our phantoms, and so changing the you see, not only the Europeans in America, that was a particular way to be colonists, but also the Spanish in Southern America, that was a sort of distracting approach with local population, or in Asia, or the first misunderstanding was the one that was translated in the 17th of the last century in a series of studies comparing the colonialist approach. This ellos son como niños is a phrase that is a quotation from a letter by Christopher Columbus to the Spanish kingdom, explaining the ingenuous, the original nature of native population he met when he was in Hispaniola, that in his idea were like children, pure, to be completely destroyed. But ellos son como niños, this way to see to the other, in fact, was not the way of the Greeks. It's our way to see the others, the third world population, the not European, not Western population. So, in a sense, to look at new plantation of the root of our culture in West was a way to see, to enlarge and share with other population in the West that roots. That is the image of cover of a publication made at the end of 19th of the last century as the catalogue of an exposition, the most important exposition of archaeological documents coming from the Greeks of the West, and made exactly to demonstrate that in the West there were true Greeks, true people who share the great culture of the Greeks. That is what rightly Peter van Dommelen, in an article of 13 years ago, strongly attacked as a way to celebrate the settlement of Greeks in the West like one of the most historical moments in all European history. And you see the chain. We see us in the far past. We try to emphasize the importance of that past, even when it is transplanted in the West. We operate centralizing the Greeks in the history of the Mediterranean, and the final result is that when Robin Osborne tried to change this approach, starting to say, what's early Greek colonization? Did it exist? No, we have to eradicate this name from our history books. He was, in fact, simply fighting against the phantom I told before. A way, an approach that is an historiographical approach and not a reality, a way in which we have to see, to frame our object of study. So, if Osborne would be more attentive to the studies already conducted on this topic, it would find that the idea of colonization as a projection of the modern experience to the past had been already discussed at first by Finlay in 1976 and Lepore in 1980, but also before, discussing precisely on the name. Apoikia is not the same as colony, and on the historiographical frame, the context of colonization cannot be immediately projected to the past. There are a great difference in society. There are a great difference in the idea of the violence, of the nature of relationship among people. And finally, and the most important in my view, the idea that the experience is connected to the apoikia system, so the great system of various experience connected to be abroad for the Greeks and for other people, is not so equal, is not so an homogeneous model. So you have to think about the name is brought from a study of Ettore Lepore, Fenomenologia coloniale. That means a multiplicity and variety of characters which regard the causes and factor. We can see some structural causes that depends on policies and their transformation in the mainland Greece, but also by some problems or exactly the sustainability of the communities in the original frame that cannot be cannot enlarge no more, being the same. And so, because we are doing with very archaic community policy, the only way to resolve the problem of drought for such a community is divide and recreate a new segment of itself. Or other more causes that are navigation and traffics, that are contacts with other people. So a very different way of doing, which is also possible to see in the forms. We are dealing with stubble settlements, plantation in a proper sense, but also with groups that begin and then grew up thanks to newcomers that joined them in a second time, or also little groups living inside communities that are not of a Greek culture identity. Also, the results are very various, because not always a group which goes outside and stops in a place can create a community. Not always a community which starts being, goes on for long time. Sometimes we see a community during 5 years, or a few generations, or also centuries, transforming and representing itself in a different way in time. So this is phenomenology, something that tells us the variegate system we are dealing with. As concerns the name, to give to this various and so differentiated series of phenomena. In the very last years, scholars have debated if the most appropriate term is emigration or diaspora, which are useful to understand some aspects and to help us to separate to the idea of colonization. I mean, to the power, to the violence, to the hierarchical approach of cultures. Because emigration, you know, I'm Italian, so there's something that remembers us, the way in which Italians were treated when they were is useful to understand the economical and social components of being abroad. That is very important when we think to Greek settlement in southern Italy. But as a problem in my view, because in this way we stress the structural reason, but forget the system, the way, the organized way to realize this kind of experiences, which have a special importance in Greek history. They cover all the many centuries of Greek history, from the very beginning of the first millennium before Christ to the Hellenistic time. So they are a long durée, a long time spanning way of doing that we have to understand as a specific, as a peculiar approach of the Greek world. So emigration, yes, but also something more. And the same as diaspora, because you see, diaspora as colonization is a name that means something more inside. For us, diaspora is, you see the image of the Hebrew diaspora in Roman times, but also the Armenian one, the diaspora of the many people who have to go away from their land for political or for violence reasons, losing a part of themselves, and even if when they enroute in another place, always thinking about their roots, always thinking about a sort of nostalgia of coming back. This is the heel of being in diaspora. That's something that we cannot find in Greek experience. Even if we, with diaspora, stress the idea of being all around in the Mediterranean, being separate, be as the flowers think that that go with the wind. The idea, the nostalgia of coming back is something that you cannot find in this kind of experience of the Greek world, because they just create new reality, and the look back was very extraneous to their feeling. So, in this sense, I ask you, why not colonies if, with the word colony, in fact, we are able to convey the idea of little groups of an archaic or simpler structure, as cats. What's the word you use of a group of cats that creates a new plantation? Is colony, or bees, or ants, or coral, or also fishermen, as you see there, the fishermen in one of the islands around Campania, Procida. So, simple community can reduplicate themselves, creating a new opportunity for someone who was in different condition before. But in my sense, particularly creating a new opportunity of relationship. So if there's something right in what I just told. We have to manage this new idea of colonization, of movement abroad to recreate a new segment of society. We need appropriate tools, historiographical tools in my view, and in particular two instruments that we can find in historical discussion of the last century. The first, I think you know, is Mediterranean mobility and as a framework, something that does not regard only the Greeks, but is a general condition of the ancient world, and in particular as a phenomenon that goes on for centuries, and so you have to be prepared to see changing in time. Not always the same, not always the same balancement of forces. Something that lives its own life and changes. And the same, as difficult to manage as the first, is frontier history, which is a sociological model created in the study of the 19th century America, in fact, to create, it was created by Turner, that was an anthropologist, to explain the feeling, a strong feeling of innovation shared by people who from the west to the east moved, creating the United States of America and conquering in this frame the new great spaces that in a colonialist perspective were no man land, because they simply ignored the Native American people. But in later approaches, as the Owen Latimore's one and other scholars, frontier history became something different. Understand how different partners, different groups encountering themselves in a context that is far enough from the original place from which all of them came, can start changing themselves and giving origin to a new way of doing that is something really different from what they were. They change and do not simply reproduce what they have inside in their society codes, but they slightly change in contact with other and with new geographical and productive environment and different cultural components of the new society. This looks like, sounds as middle ground, but in fact, middle ground is just an initial context, something that you start when you meet the other. Frontier history is the story that you build up with the others, making them become a part of yourself, a part of your own community. When you start to build up something that is not the original Greek community, but is the local Greek, but also the other which could share that opportunity in a new environment, in a new condition of economic possibilities, sharing with the image I always recall is the idea of a new community that shares a father who comes from Greece and a mother who comes from the local population. The names of the things, the name of bread, the name of water, that you start thinking in two languages and then using one of the two formulas, you can create your own identity. That's to be in a frontier history. And in this sense, I think that frontier history is the more appropriate way to approach the studies of community built up by the presence of different societies and cultures in southern Italy. That is what you can find it, this image in the Parcells article dedicated to 4th century Magna Graecia, where he describes this society, not more Italic society or Greek society, like a world sharing ideals, economic formulas, hierarchy sometimes, and also partner from outside. So sharing a differentiate system in which we can also be facilitate when we say Messapians, Lucans, or Samnites, or Greeks. But in fact, the society is simply common to all of them.
Refers to a specific area where two cultures, two political institutions meet, which are not familiar to each other. They create a frontier, like the American West, for instance. But I mean, it's not. I mean, I've got the idea that too often the frontier concept is being used. Actually, it's not the same thing as the history of France, but it's being used to argue that the rest of history is different from frontier history. And I don't think so, because quite often, I mean, it is all about using, it's about constructing identity. It's about, well, maybe we should not go into this, because it's a bit theoretical. And
probably you're right, but I never thought this aspect of the separation from history, because I mean that in that case the idea of reality in which all partners get their own space, their own contribution is important. the most important aspect concerning the frontier history for me comes from the elaboration that is shared also by Orden and Parcel. Not a frontier as a divide, but a frontier as a space in which everything is possible, so to speak, as Finlay wrote. I mean, a space in which we just have to look at to see who was the leader, which was the stronger system, which create the role, who was sharing that or changing that, in which condition the change happened. So in a sense, the opposite that usually has been made in applying sociological or anthropological models to the history. Look at the context you have, look at the sources you have to speak, and then interpret it. That's my idea, that's the idea in which history applied to a frontier could be useful to be proposed. Put all the discussion together and find a way to present them. Of course, I'll, if you want, I'll give to Gert-Jan a copy of this presentation with a short bibliography that will be useful for you if you want to know something more on the argument, but I'm conscious that I have to be very, very general dealing with these arguments. But for this second shorter part, let's start to again a quotation from Finlay and from a contribution that you see is of more than 50 years ago. And it's very astonishing to see in which way the most interesting observation on the problem have been completely forgotten by scholars who went after that idea of the phantom. So, in reality, we have to forget the idea of a Greek colonial world, of a colonial world and of a Greek colonial world, both. And as an abstraction, in fact, as well abstract as the idea of natives. It's a changing and moving world of encounters in which, I mean that we have to look first at the quality of our documents. Sometimes they let us to construct an articulated story and reconstruction of the past. Sometimes we just have to suggest, to hypothesize and try to find more. Let's come back to the difference. Now I run on some different area you see in Italy. Here we are in Campania and in central Italy, where the meetings happened at the very beginning of Greek frequentation, Greek and Levantine Canaanians also a frequentation of the Western Sea. And in this context, you rightly can find a sort of colonial middle ground, or first step of encounters, as has been suggested by Irad Malkin, by other scholars studying precisely the archaeology of Etruria and Campania. Another context very different is the one that you find in between southern Italy and Sicily, the strait area that's more connected to sailing from Ionian Sea to Mediterranean Sea, supporting that connection that was created in central Italy, but different in the quality of the components, as we see that the area of the southern Calabria and the very southernmost part which was occupied by local population, which, as Laurent Marcury has stressed, here you see a very different situation, because La Mastuola is something quite different from Siris, Termitito and Coronata, but the reason I show you the wall area is that here we met a transformation of Greek presence from a sort of mixed communities, a presence side by side of little Greek nuclei and little native nuclei, sharing perhaps traffics or a control of the interesting gateway nature of this part of the land, receiving from the north and from the inner hills and looking at the sea with context that as far as Siris, Policoro, or in Coronata and Termitito are concerned, touch the eastern coast of Mediterranean, the Ionian cities, the Ionian foundation of Greece in Anatolic Peninsula. In this situation has been strongly debated because of here, in particular in Policoro, but also in Coronata, where a scandal was somewhat drawn when the archaeological finds shown that people from Greece was living in buildings buildings of this kind and not in regular houses of a typical Greek form. But also in Metaponto, so the three sides which are side by side with the rivers going inside, we see a change of this kind of settlement of the earlier times, which is more open and less structured as a community. In time, we can see that the creation of political communities, of polis in a Greek sense, corresponds to a change in Greek presence, in destruction of the previous system created by the contact of native Greeks by other Greeks who started living there, divided land, and create a new organization. That's the point, because an important change we have to look at when we consider this kind of experience is how this community are organized as concerns the possessing of the goods that are essential. Who works? Who has land? Who participate in the opportunities for richness? That's not always to say the natives are the poor, are the one who works and the Greeks are the others. It's not always so, absolutely. But we have to look at the system that is behind the image of that community that is going on at that moment. If a change is possible to see between open community of the kind of the policoro that we learn by Archaeologus, that is a Greek poet of the middle 7th century, who talks about the richness of that place around the sea, Siris, so different from Tarsus, or some later sources which speak about a Polyaion, a place where some merchants, some people living there for exchange were organized. The very difference between that situation, the situation and the Greek polis of Siris, the Greek polis of Metaponto, is the creation of a socio-political system which we can start to see in material sources, in archaeology, and in written sources that we cannot use immediately, of course. So, an earlier system of presences that share the opportunities and are in effect not organized as political organization, and a change into political situation that happens around the second half, the end of the 7th century before Christ, totally changing the relationship among the various society living in this part of Italy. still more different system we can adopt to understand what kind of relationship were going on in that kind of societies. That of Sybaris, the Greek city that was famous in our written sources to be a strange Greek cities, because contrarily to all the other polis which were jealous of their citizenship, Sybaris was open to others, was able to receive citizens from outside, becoming sort of a scandal of the situation. And in fact, in the time that spans from the beginning of the 6th century to the end of the century when Sybaris was destroyed by Crotons, we can see a particular system which is made not only by the polis of Sybaris, which we don't know in fact, or by the relationship of Sybaris and the settlements in the area made by objects of Greek type that have make scholars think there is a sort of hellenization, there is a strong influence of Sybaris on the local. In reality, if we look at our sources in a different way, we can see a system which is not connotated as Greek or local, or we see a lot of communities talking and communicating on an economical ground, because we see that from the second half of the century exchanges were made more simpler, creating a common standard of exchange that was a coinage on a specific standard with a specific symbol, and able to convey the idea of a territorial system led by Sybaris. The symbol of the bull looking back is the idea of the river, image of the river that create the great richness of Sybaris, but is shared by a lot of communities that are not in fact Greek communities, as this one Cyrino speaks of, as that probably corresponds to sort of settlements, open settlements in the area of Syris, or army, everybody except them, Gert-Jan of course, for a long time, because La Mascuola was known from the excavation of the first excavation.
86.
And so when the discussion about the Tarantine Cora started, La Mascuola was inserted in this idea. The Tarantine went to Apulia, they conquered, and they constructed their territory according to the idea of a strong immediate violence against the local Iapigian, the local Apulian. Then the approach has been changed, has been framed in a different context, because the first important information that the excavation by the Dutch mission in La Mastuola has given is that La Mastuola has an old history before the coming of Greeks, and this story is connected to a sort of internal colonization, internal move, is connected to the creation of a system of settlement that is precisely connected to this area in between the two seas in the central isthmic area of Apulia. The idea that a settlement starts in the same period as Taranto is established and presents an organization, a sort of continuity, because the observation on the settlement itself led not to see a strong discontinuity. It's not so, Gert. Not a discontinuity in the settlement between the houses of an old native fashion and houses of squared so-called Greek. So, not a trauma in the flux of settlement in La Mastuola that is possible to connect to an impact, violent impact with Taranto. But an organization that shows some elements that led scholars to think that people of different culture pertainance was there in the same moment. A divide into areas, the one dedicated to the dead, the one dedicated to the living, is an idea more connected to the Greek way of staying, because we know that there's not a very clear difference into areas dedicated to that in local settlements of the same period. And moreover, we have a particular way of doing with that in native population as funerary rituals. And then the possibility to find some objects, systems of objects connected to some tombs, local systems of objects and Greek systems of objects, and also a symbol of the possibility of communication that is this piece of stone conformed as stele, easy to connect to the local tradition of funerary stele, characterized as human body dressed and perhaps a female body dressed, which suggested to someone the idea of communication made perhaps by the sharing of women as a gift, or aliens, a sort of common system of inhabitation shared by locals and Tarantine. To others, with the same object, the idea has been that the impossibility to see from where the symbolic object or other elements of the non-Greek connection are difficult to interpret as a sign of convivence, but can more easily in accord to the idea of Tarantine dominion on the territory. The problem in this case is the lack of more explicit documentation that let us decide in a sure way for a possibility or for the other. I stop here, but let me just summarize something. From the general view, the series of cases I just quickly show you is the mean I have to draw up a Magna Graecia system of relationship that is strongly integrated with local and precise opportunities of native, the so-called native, and the so-called Greeks living in particular situation to build up some new experience that are in a sense the body, the blood, the real sense of that frontier I try to show as the new field of studies concerning Magna Graecia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. It's all very complicated discussing Modenente. Modenente has its origins, of course, in the same period. Actually, think that Modenente is part of this internal, local, indigenous colonization movement. But similar processes happen here. So we'll come back to this often during the excavations to discuss. I think you gave us a very insightful discussion of the various options, starting from Finlay onwards. I think of Moses Finlay, the ancient historians amongst us. But still, you're ancient historian innate. Moses Finlay is like a god, and he still is indeed forgotten. He is forgotten by a lot of us. So.
The most interesting to say about Finlay is that he is the most important of the scholar of the non-modernist approach. So he was a Greek historian who really believed that the Greeks are not to see so perfect and
He was a sociologist,
yeah,
of course.
also.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so it's very astonishing that his contribution that could be very enlightening for our topics has been completely not considered.
Mhm.
You see that Osborne simply do not speaks about Osborne.
Oh, he should know him. He knows it. I think.
Yeah, I'm sure he knows, but
Because Osborne,
and-
Saltgrass, etc. There's a line between the whole.
yeah, of course,
Plan,
but
of course.
he ignores him, in fact.
Yeah. Does anybody have a question? So it's late, but well, again, we will be coming back to this discussion, various discussions, because there's so much going on. Maybe not. I think I will take up your discussion into southern Italy, and we will be coming back there to the same issue. So I would really thank you again very much, Vrije, for the very stimulating issues that you raised now, and we haven't finished discussion. I didn't want to overdo the discussion right here.
I'm quite
because,
sure we have not finished.
Okay, thank you very much again, and
Thank
to
you.
the students.